so secure? The logical alternative is then propounded: to dispatch an army of infantry with the lightest type of field guns in big sea-going lighters, towed by powerful but shallow draught tugs, under escort of a powerful composite squadron of warships, and to fling the flotilla, at high tide if possible, straight upon the shore. Such an expedition could be prepared in absolute secrecy by turning to account the natural features of the German coast. No great port was to be concerned in any way. All that was required was sufficient depth of water to float the lighters and tugs, and this is supplied by 7 insignificant streams, issuing from the Frisian littoral, and already furnished with small harbours and sluice gates, with one exception, namely, the tidal creek at Norden, for this, it appeared, was one of the chosen 7, and not, as Carruthers supposed, Hilgenriedersiel, which, if you remember, he had no time to visit, and which has, in fact, no stream of any value at all, and no harbour. All of these streams would have to be improved, deepened, and generally canalised, ostensibly with a commercial end, for purposes of traffic with the islands, which are growing health resorts during a limited summer season. The whole expedition would be organised under 7 distinct subdivisions, not too great a number in view of its cumbrous character. Seawards, the whole of the coast is veiled by the fringe of islands and the zone of shoals. Landwards, the loop of railway round the Frisian peninsula would form the line of communication in rear of the 7 streams. Esens was to be the local centre of administration when the scheme grew to maturity, but not till then. Every detail for the movement of troops under the 7 different heads was to be arranged for with secrecy and exactitude many months in advance, and from headquarters at Berlin. It was not expected that nothing would leak out, but care was to be taken that anything that did so should be attributed to defensive measures, a standing feature in German mobilisation being the establishment of a corps of observation along the Frisian coast. In fact, the same machinery was to be used, and its conversion for offence concealed up to the latest possible moment. The same precautions were to be taken in the preliminary work on the spot. There 4 men only, it was calculated, need be in full possession of the secret. One was to represent the Imperial Navy, a post filled by our friend von Brüning. Another, Böhme, was to superintend the 6 canals and the construction of the lighters. The functions of the third were twofold. He was to organise what I may call the local labour, that is, the helpers required for embarkation, the crews of the tugs, and, most important of all, the service of pilots for the navigation of the 7 flotillas through the corresponding channels to the open sea. He must be a local man, thoroughly acquainted with the coast, of a social standing not much above the average of villagers and fishermen, and he must be ready when the time was ripe, with lists of the right men for the right duties, lists to which the conscription authorities could, when required, give instant legal effect. His other function was to police the coast for spies, and to report anything suspicious to von Brüning, who would never be far away. On the whole, I think that they found the grim Grimm a jewel for their purpose. As 4th personage, the writer designates himself, the promoter of the scheme, the indispensable link between the 2 nations. He undertakes to furnish reliable information as to the disposition of troops in England, as to the hydrography of the coast selected for the landing, as to the supplies available in its vicinity, and the strategic points to be seized. He proposes to be guide-in-chief to the expedition during transit. And in the meantime, when not otherwise employed, he was to reside at Norderney, in close touch with the other 3, and controlling the commercial undertakings which were to throw dust in the eyes of the curious. Memmert, by the way, is not mentioned in this memorandum. He speaks of the place selected for the landing, and proceeds to consider this question in detail. I cannot follow him in his review, deeply interesting though it is, and shall say at once that he reduces possible landing places to two, the flats on the Essex coast between Foulness and Brightlingsea, and the Wash, with a decided preference for the latter. Assuming that the enemy, if they got wind of an invasion at all, would expect transports to be employed, he chooses the sort of spot which they would be least likely to defend, and which, nevertheless, was suitable to the character of the flotillas, and similar to the region they started from. There is such a spot on the Lincolnshire coast, on the north side of the Wash, known as East Holland. It is low-lying land, diked against the sea, and bordered like Frisia, with sand flats which dry off at low water. It is easy of access from the coast by way of Boston Deeps, a deep-water channel formed by a detached bank, called the Long Sand, lying parallel to the shore for 10 miles. This bank makes a natural breakwater against the swell from the east, the only quarter to be feared, and the deeps behind it, where there is an average depth of 34 feet at low water, would form an excellent roadstead for the covering squadron, whose guns would command the shore within easy range. It is noted in passing that this is just the case where German first-class battleships would have an advantage over British ships of the same calibre. The latter are of just too heavy a draught to navigate such waters without peril, if indeed they could enter this roadstead at all, for there is a bar at the mouth of it with only 31 feet at high water, spring tides. The former, built as they were with a view to manoeuvring in the North Sea, are just within the margin of safety. East Holland is within striking distance of the manufacturing districts, a vigorous raid on which is, the writer urges, the true policy of an invader. He reports positively that there exists, in a proper military sense, no preparation whatever to meet such an attack. East Holland is also the nearest point on the British shores to Germany, excepting the coast of Norfolk, much nearer indeed than the Essex flats alluded to, and reached by a simple deep-sea passage without any dangerous region to navigate, like the mouth of the Channel and the estuary of the Thames from Harwich westwards. The distance is 240 sea miles, west by south roughly, from Borkum Island, and 280 from Wangeroog. The time estimated for transit after the flotillas had been assembled outside the islands is from 30 to 34 hours. Embarkation is the next topic. This could and must be effected in one tide. At the 6 Siels there was a mean period of 2½ hours in every 12, during which the water was high enough. At Norden a rather longer time was available, but this should be amply sufficient if the machinery were in good working order and were punctually set in motion. High water occurs approximately at the same time at all 7 outlets, the difference between the two farthest apart, Carolinensiel and Greetsiel, being only half an hour. Lastly, the special risks attendant on such an expedition are dispassionately weighed. X, though keenly anxious to recommend his scheme, writes in no blindly sanguine spirit. There are no modern precedents for any invasion in the least degree comparable to that of England by Germany. Any such attempt will be a hazardous experiment. But he argues that the advantages of his method outweigh the risks, and that most of the risks themselves would attach equally to any other method. Whatever skill in prediction was used, bad weather might overtake the expedition. Yes, but if transports were used, transshipment into boats for landing would in bad weather be fraught with the same and a greater peril. But transports could stand off and wait. Delay is fatal in any case. Unswerving promptitude is the essence of such an enterprise. The lighters would be in danger of foundering? Beside the point. If the end is worth gaining, the risks must be faced. Soldiers' lives are